How does Tom Brady, LeBron James, or any elite athlete at that level be able to compete week in and week out at the highest levels? Well, my guest today, Dr. Scott Goldman, is a performance coach, and he's worked with some of the best athletes and coaches in the world. We're talking world champions, MVPs, gold medal winners, Final Four participants. I mean, the best of the best. And he's helped them achieve optimal performance. The way they talk to themselves, the way they approach a very important game. And he is going to share that wisdom openly. And I'll tell you, he is one of the deepest thinkers I've ever had on the ThriveMore podcast. And it was just awesome to watch him process a question and then answer it so genuinely, so authentically, with data and experience and citations. You're really going to enjoy this. And get out the notebook. There's a lot of wisdom in this guy, and he's about to share it. Dr. Goldman is a high-performance and clinical psychologist. Over 25 years, he has served and continues to serve the NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, and NCAA organizations. He provides clinical and performance psychological work to not only the athletes, but also human system expertise to the head coach, general manager, vice president, and staff of various teams. He's worked with some of the best athletes, coaches, and teams in the world, including, but not limited to, world champions, gold medal winners, world record holders, MVPs from every major sport, and Final Four teams. He's also co-authoring the NCAA's best practices and guidelines for understanding and supporting student-athlete mental wellness, which is a very important topic, and we'll talk about that today. Scott, welcome to the ThriveMore podcast.
It's an honor to be a part of this. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. We focus on business, health, and wealth. And of course, this performance coaching helps with health and with, building wealth and improving your business. I don't think I have interviewed a sports psychologist on this show. So if you can just talk about how you got into this, what your background is, and what the difference maybe is between sports psychology and other performance coaching.
Sure. So how I got into it, I don't know if you remember, there were those old school Reese's peanut butter commercials where a guy would be walking by eating chocolate and then the other person was walking by eating peanut butter and they collided and they're like, you got your chocolate, my peanut butter. Well, you got your peanut butter and my chocolate. That to me was about sports psychology. I was in grad school and I was playing semi-professional soccer at the time. And I've always had a love for sport, and it's meant a lot to me. The people that I've had a chance to engage and forge relationships with, and it was all through sport, from childhood to all the way up to grad school and beyond. And I've always been fascinated by human behavior. I just never knew that the two worlds could collide. So it was sort of like the Reese's peanut butter cup moment for me. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then the second part of your question is, I think, I got to think how to phrase this, but I think of sports psychology as a specialization, not a special population. And what I mean by that is some people will see sports psychology as a special group. I treat the person no different just because they're wearing different clothing. So they're wearing a leotard instead of a business suit kind of thing. But when they come into my office, I treat them the same. And I think that kind of misses the mark. I think specialization is more accurate, which is when you understand the unique aspects. Like, for example, I was working with a world-class figure skater, and he had won more world championships than anyone else in his sport, but had yet to have Olympic success. And he was explaining to me what it feels like to be, that quote or that passage, the man in the arena. Like, he was explaining to me what it feels like to be on the ice all by himself with the whole entire audience staring at him, and knowing that there's also a televised audience staring at him virtually, or from a distance. Yeah. I'm just not so sure that kind of stimulus or that kind of impact is universal. Yeah. So I think the way I explain it to some folks when I do work in the business sector is some things are the same. Like anxiety and the sensations of anxiety are the same, but some things are different, like what induces the anxiety or what we tell ourselves about a situation that triggers the anxiety is different.
Yeah, yeah. And you've I think this is yours. You've developed what you call an athletic intelligence quotient, an AIQ. Can you explain what that is and how you implement that in your coaching and work?
Yeah. So and it's funny because you were talking about business, and for right now, maybe this is 5 minutes ago or maybe it's
Yeah.
still happening, but it seems like some corporate leaders are starting to look at their employees as athletes. If we give
Hmm.
them the resources that athletes get, would we get a better output? So they're emphasizing things like nutrition and support and just, performance optimization, and that, from the neck down and the neck up.
Yeah.
All right. So now going back to the AIQ, I think one of the reasons why I love sport, and I would guess a lot of other people share this passion, is it's unwritten. It is the
Mm.
ultimate like unwritten soap opera. It was reality television before reality
Yeah.
television.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why fans have such a connection, one of the reasons, is because we don't know what the outcome's going to be. That uncertainty breeds a level of excitement.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, how do high performers, how do elite performers succeed in this uncertain situation or circumstance? Clearly, you got to have, like, you got to be this tall to ride the roller coaster, right? So you got to have physical attributes. So you got to be big, strong, and fast. But, you know, especially like back in the 80s, we kind of figured that out. Strength and conditioning has really done a great job of putting forth some beautiful science to catch up there. So
Yeah.
strength, so again, physical, check. Then we talk about like experience and knowledge. So in the world of the NFL, for example, you talk to most talent evaluators, you know what kind of defensive lineman you're getting from Georgia. I mean, that coaching staff down there is doing an amazing job of developing some supreme players.
Yeah.
And so you go, okay, if I grab a defensive lineman from Georgia, I know what they've been taught. So that's the second bucket, experience. Third bucket was personality. And this is where things get a little bit more subjective and becomes more complicated in measuring and understanding. So personality would be things like, are they glue guys? That's an expression in sports, right? Are they glue guys? In other words, do they bring the community and the culture together? Are they the ties that bind? Or are they toxic? Are they locker room poison? Are they somebody to be managed or somebody to be celebrated? That kind of stuff. So
Mm.
that third bucket's all about personality. And for decades, that's kind of where things stopped when it came to talent evaluation. And while I was in grad school and learning about intelligence theory, I went, wait a minute. I think how these guys process information, I think the fact that they're constantly navigating puzzles, like when a quarterback throws a ball, or like Wayne Gretzky had that great quote where he said, you don't go where the puck is, you go where the puck is going.
Yeah.
So there's this element of anticipation and pattern recognition. There's an element of solving the Rubik's Cube while also trying to avoid getting, tackled by a 300-pound
Sure.
defensive lineman.
Yeah.
So I said, I'm curious, why are we not talking about intelligence in sport? It seems like that's a missing piece to the profile. So I did a whole bunch of research, and there just wasn't really anything out there. There was another instrument that most people know about that was created in 1934. And I just felt like it was kind of outdated, and I thought we could make a better mousetrap. And so I reached out to my partner. His name's Jim Bowman. And so Jim Bowman was at St. John's University and was being trained by one of the premier experts in intelligence theory. So I said, hey, I've got this idea. He goes, oh, this is exactly the kind of research that my professor and I are working on. Let's develop this together. I was like, great. So we spent 15 years. And what we did was we just looked at unsolvable puzzles. So firefighters, first responders, police officers, military, astronauts, like anyone that has to like kick down a door and identify threats and danger, as well as people to rescue. That's a cognitive task. That's intelligence. So we said, all right, a quarterback who's scanning the field, looking at pre-snap reads, is doing what a firefighter is doing when he kicks the door down. So we ended up coming up with 15 different points of data to discuss. I think human beings are complicated.
Oh, sure.
And intelligence is also fairly complicated. So it's fun. I laugh because I said we simplified it to 15 key cognitive abilities. That's as short as we can make it.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're saying intelligence too, and I think you may have been referring to the Wonderlic test. I don't know if that's the yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a direct correlation between raw intelligence, God-given intelligence, and the ability to perform? Then is that what you're saying, that a more intelligent quarterback, running back, forward on a basketball court, whatever, will perform better?
Well, so again, interesting question. I've got two answers.
Okay.
If you can predict in sports, you should just go to Vegas. Like sometimes I'll be talking to a GM and they'll say like, hey, should we take this guy or this guy based off the AIQ? And I tell him, I go, look, if you want me to do your job for you, like, then I want your salary. And then more times than not, they laugh. They don't see that as me being a jerk. So I try to say it in a nice way, like, but they get it. And I really actually say it in a way where I'm trying to be deferential and respectful. Like I said, look, if I could tell you who's going to be the next, Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, I would just go to your owner and I'd say, hey, pay me a ton of money and you can get rid of that entire front office and scouting department. Like I can't do that. But what I can do and what the AIQ can do is it can provide you information. I'm a big believer that well-informed people make really smart decisions.
Yep.
And so sometimes I think about going back to those 4 buckets, like if you think about intelligence is almost like being the couch in your living room. Whether the lights are on or off, the couch is still there. And if you don't turn on the lights, you're going to trip over the couch. If you do turn on the lights, then you know where to sit. Yeah. So similarly, like a player's intelligence, it exists whether you're measuring for it or not. You might as well understand it because then you can put them in situations of success. You can put them in, like this actually happened with one of the NFL teams I was working for. We had a linebacker on the practice squad and our fullback got injured, tore his ACL. And there's just not a lot of fullbacks left in the NFL. Yeah. And we were one of the few teams that liked to run with a fullback set. So now all of a sudden we're trying to scramble and look for where can we find a fullback? And I said, well, this linebacker, he's got an AIQ profile that suggests he could adapt to a new sport and could flip sides of the ball. Yeah. So we did it. And it worked out really well for him. I mean, 1, he got to play in the NFL versus being a practice squad player. Yeah. And 2, he got a second contract, which is when they get pension. And that's the good stuff if you're a player. Yeah. So I'd like to think that what we've done with this information is helped individuals have longer careers, helped coaches and front office make better decisions, things like that. Yeah. So that's answer number 1. Answer number 2, and thanks for letting me be kind of long-winded.
No, sure.
Answer number 2 is intelligence is one of the most genetically stable traits that we have. And there is a body of literature that talks about how intelligence does correlate with high performance. So when you think about job success, architects, lawyers, again, pilots, there's just a ton of literature that shows intelligence is a real asset. And sometimes that makes sense, like, hey, smart people kind of thing. But the way it kind of breaks down is true intelligence is our ability to download information. And it becomes like, okay, well, how large is our hard drive? Is it a 1 terabyte hard drive or is it, 28 gigs kind of thing? but it's also the ability to kind of like manipulate and process information. So when something breaks down, your ability to improvise or be creative, intelligence really helps with that. So something that we're proud of, it's not even like a humble brag, like it's just straight brag,
Yeah.
is we have 5 white papers. And a white paper is a peer-reviewed academic journal published article, meaning that it had to go through the scrutiny of professors in academia who love to rip apart things like your methods section or anything else. And I bring it up as an important detail because sometimes companies will create their own quote unquote science where they go, oh, look, like 46% of the time. And it's like, 9 out of 10 dentists agree that you can chew this gum, that kind of stuff. And it's like, that's not real science. That's just marketing science.
Yeah.
What we did with the 5 is we had a professor, it wasn't even us, who did this. And what we had was 3 articles that were published show a statistically significant correlation between AIQ scores and on-field performance in the NFL. Meaningful stuff with quarterbacks in touchdowns or turnover-worthy plays, or with running backs rushing yards, or linebackers in tackles for losses or turnovers, pre-snap penalties with offensive linemen, like pretty meaningful stuff. The 4th published paper was on the NBA. So rebounds, field goal efficiency, turnovers, again, meaningful on-court behavior. And then the 5th one was in Major League Baseball with key hitting and pitching statistics. So
Wow.
I don't know of any other product out there that has 1 white paper published, much less 5. And so I think we've hit something here.
For sure. This segment is sponsored by Rockbox Fitness Franchising. Take control of your destiny and join the boutique fitness revolution with Rockbox Fitness. If you're ready to make a real impact in your community and own your own business that empowers people to achieve their best life, then Rockbox is the opportunity you've been looking for. They provide comprehensive support from site selection, upfit, training, and turnkey marketing, so you can open your studio with confidence and a strong recurring revenue member base. Visit rockboxfitness.com and click on franchise opportunities to learn more about this exciting venture in the fast-growing boutique fitness industry. It's time to turn your passion for fitness and for business into a thriving venture. Of course, confidential, so no names. But can you speak in detail about maybe a specific individual that you worked with in whatever the sport was that it was really in their own head, and they were really having a tough time, and you were able to get them out of that space? And I think would be fascinating to me and the listeners is how did you get them out of that space? That negative headspace?
Yeah, no, it's a cool question. And I think language is important. So if I could politely kind of twist it a little bit.
Of course.
I don't think of it's easy to portray this. And I think sometimes there are other providers who like to portray this where it's, hey, I did this to them. And the reality is like, in the way that I prefer to do the work, it's more collaborative. And it's their life, it's their moment, it's their process. So at best, I try to create an optimal environment, asking key and meaningful questions so that they can come to some really meaningful conclusions. So I can think of a time where a player and myself worked on something and kind of got some stuff really resolved, which I think is really cool. But I wouldn't want to take credit for it.
Sure.
Like, I really think one of my mentors said this to me and it always resonated. He said, Scott, it's really easy to see where the cameras are pointed on the sidelines. And you can be in front of the camera or behind it. If you want to make it about you, you can. And I was like, I don't. That's like these young men and young women, they work so hard to be the best at what they are. To take credit for their victory it's criminal.
Yeah.
So I can say that I'm proud of being a part of the process. I'm proud of being that resource, but I just want to give credit where credit's due. Okay.
Well, what a great answer. Yeah.
that was also me trying to extend time where I could think in the back of my mind for a moment.
Well played. Well played.
This was a cool moment. I was working for an NFL team, and our kick returner, who was an all-pro kick returner, started out the beginning of the year struggling. And he wasn't doing it, for whatever reason. He had just come off a pretty serious injury the year before. He tore his ACL, and so maybe there was some hesitation there. I wasn't really sure what was going on, but the first 3-4 games, he was struggling. And I think the thing was I just didn't want to see him in pain anymore. He was such a good guy, such a kind-hearted person, was super kind and friendly to me just around the building. So before one of the games, I approached him and I just said, "Look, can we talk?" And he said, "Sure, Doc, what's up?" And we just talked. We talked a lot about what was going on. Sometimes you don't want to make a thing, so you don't want to go, "Hey, I know you're struggling." So I just asked, I said, "How's it going?" And he was real open and honest. "Hey, it's been a kind of a hard time." And I said, "What do you think's going on?" And we talked about some of the obstacles. And most of them kind of felt psychological. We talked about the joy of the game. We talked about being present-minded. We talked about some other aspects of things that might just click, The game started. He ran the kickoff back for a touchdown.
Oh my gosh.
And the thing that was so cool is, because I was on the sidelines, is he's running on the sidelines. Like, he's just right there on the sidelines. And I'm like, go. It's just like one of these moments where I was just a total fan, right?
Yeah.
And like, he saw me and I saw, like, again, because he's running right by me and I'm just like, let's go. So he scores a touchdown, comes over, kind of flips the ball to me and was like, "Hey man, like, thank you." And I was like, "That's not me, but that's you."
Yeah.
And that was just a really cool moment,
It's out of a movie. It's like a scene out of a movie. I mean, that's
kind
fantastic.
of, right?
Yeah.
But look, it's not like so it's funny because he goes, "Thanks." And I said, "Look," I said, "really good ones get one. I said, great ones get two." And he laughed, right? So he didn't get a second one that day. So that would be the movie.
That'd be the movie. Yeah.
But that's the joy of being a sports psychologist, is getting to be a member of somebody else's journey. And so that was pretty cool. And he was a super nice guy, very, very complimentary of the work that we're doing. What's funny was almost like a superstition. It became like, now we had to talk every week. So now I'm like trying to find things to, like, find nuggets to give him before the game every Sunday. "What do you got for me, Doc? What do you got?" And I'm like, by like week 17, week 16, I was kind of running out of ideas of things to talk about. And that's the other part too, right? Is when you use that directional language you referenced, you almost become a bit of a dispensary.
Yeah.
Versus, I love the idea of kind of people utilizing the work and then graduating. Like, I've got what I needed. Now I can continue to grow independently.
Yeah. I want to definitely pivot here in just a second to the work you're doing with the NCAA on student mental wellness. But before we do that, this show, again, the listeners, a lot of them looking to up-level their skills in business, up-level their skills as a leader. What can they learn? What can I learn from a successful athlete, specifically speaking around mindset? Because, a Tom Brady, a LeBron, I mean, those guys have a different chip. There's a different chip, but there's something to be learned from their self-talk and certainly the work you do with them. What advice would you give for a business leader?
This is, and again, it's just kind of me being playful with language a little bit, is I don't know if this is advice or guidance or just a thought to germinate on. I have found that greatness comes from perseverance and competence. And I think to a certain degree, we're kind of overplaying the mental skills stuff. Like, oh, if I just engage in mindfulness, I'll be in the zone kind of thing. Like,
Sure.
look, if we could induce the zone, again, that kick returner would have gotten a touchdown every time he touched the ball kind of thing.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
it just, that kind of magic that we see sometimes in 30-second, Instagram videos or TikTok videos, like those things are really cool, but that's just not it. So I think the first place that I highlight with leaders when I engage with them is let's not undersell or undervalue competence.
Yeah.
We have to be good at what we do. And I think competence and mastery of craft, it comes from perseverance. Everybody remembers that famous 10,000 hour rule. What's funny is if you look at the literature on that, it actually ranges from 4 to 40,000. And what Anders Ericsson, the research individual, the researcher, he said that the hours can only be accrued in 45-minute segments. That the 10,000 hours really has to be a 45-minute segment because it should be such focused work. He called it deliberate practice. You should be so dialed in that after 45 minutes, you're kind of exhausted.
Yeah.
Which implies that you can't do it in a year. Like to do 45-minute segments is going to take a lifetime. So bringing it back, it kind of unpacks and unloads.
Yeah.
One of the things that Anders mentioned in his research was to do something for that amount of time with that kind of intense focus, you have to really love it. So where I tend to focus, I go, look, let's talk about competence. Let's talk about perseverance. And let's really focus on the drivers that stimulate that. So I am a big fan of passion and purpose, and I separate those. Passion to me is a more selfish thing. Like, this is what I'm passionate about. I love this. Purpose is more selfless. It's kind of like what we do for the community or for others. So like, I'm passionate about being a psychologist. I really love unlocking the puzzles and all that kind of stuff. But my purpose is really about being a good father and husband, right? So it's making sure that my kids don't have to worry about what's for dinner tonight kind of thing. Yeah. So when I'm talking with leaders, one of the places that I start is I'll ask them, do you have a mission statement? So I'll ask you, Roger. Roger, do you have a mission statement?
I do. It's to be the best father, husband, and leader I can possibly be.
And how did you go about coming up with that mission statement? Where did that come from? How did you workshop it? Did you refine it? Is that new to you? Is it old? Like, where did that come from?
It honestly comes from a question I'm going to ask you at the very end of this podcast that I've asked 120 guests that have preceded you, that was asked of me. And I won't spoil the listeners have certainly heard it, but I won't spoil the question. But it just kind of boils down to what is the most, how do I want to be remembered, and what is the most important gift I can give others, and how do I combine those two?
Yeah. So I mean, we're really talking about legacy, which is beautiful, right? So I think, especially when I'm working with coaches and front office, like GMs and presidents, they just don't have a lot of time to go through a decision-making rubric. There's a shot clock in sports. There's a speed to the game that everything's really a sprint to Sunday in the NFL, for example. So the mission statement, exploration, and journey is it gives you a compass or a North Star. So that way, when you don't have a lot of time to make decisions, it can help speed that up because you can default to it. So this is really just a long-winded way of saying, like, if you understand a person's driver and their motivation for why they will do the uncomfortable or do the things that other people won't do, if you can understand that both in your staff and in yourself and look for alignment, you can do some pretty cool things.
Yeah. No, that was a great answer. That was a great answer.
I passed.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. High AIQ. I love it. I love it. So what do you find? And again, I love how you choose language. I'm starting to really study NLP and just the importance of the words we say to ourselves and we just use when speaking. so I don't want to say headspace or roadblock, right? Because I'm not sure if that's the right word. What is there a pattern? Let me ask a more open-ended question. Is there a pattern or a more similar causation for people to have a mental roadblock, be it an athlete, be it a performance person, business, athletics, whatever it is? Is there usually a common thread? I think that's the question I'm trying to ask. Is there a common thread to why people will create their own mental roadblock in
That's a
pursuing
cool
their goals?
question. Guys, it's a really cool question. So, I mean, like you hear about things like the yips, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because though everybody kind of knows that term, I don't know how well it's been researched or defined. And sometimes there's a more physical explanation, like the yips can be like there's a micro tear that has just never been discovered. So there's a hitch in the throwing motion and stuff. But from a psychological perspective, I appreciate you giving me the space to kind of go deep.
Yeah.
I think sometimes that's nice. In the world of sports, everybody wants a quick answer. And
Sure.
I'm like, I don't know.
Give me the soundbite. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Give me the 30 seconds. And I'm just not good at that. I have a tendency to be long-winded. There was a guy, his name's Maurer. And Maurer has this thing called the two-factor learning theory of avoidance. What Maurer describes, and I've always found it to really hold true, is that there is a classical conditioning of a critical incident. So think about like if you got bit by a snake, now all of a sudden you're afraid of snakes. That's the classical conditioning, right? Like remember Pavlov's dogs ring the bell, they salivate. So now every time you think you're in an environment where there's a snake, you're going to have that fear, oh, I could get bit here. That's the classical. So that's step one of his two-part process. However, there's a second part, which is based off of operant conditioning. And the difference between classical conditioning and operant conditioning is so classical conditioning is where you pair a stimulus and a response. Operant conditioning is something just happens and then we react to it. And then that reaction is either reinforced to do more or less of. So what's amazing about his theory was we have a critical incident and that teaches us something that we pair. So again, bit by a snake. Now every time I'm around a valley, I think there's a snake out there and I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But the second part of it, the operant conditioning, is I avoid going to the valley and I feel better because I'm avoiding that fear stimulus. So I avoid going to valley, then I avoid going outside, then I avoid leaving my room. So the avoidant aspect can kind of circle itself.
Yeah.
So what's interesting in the world of sports, and there has been some research on this, where if a guy misses a game-winning shot at an arena, oftentimes they will shoot below their average when they go and play. So you'll see this from time to time, and they never reference it as the yips or anything else, but they'll go, oh, such and so quarterback has never won in this particular stadium.
And they'll associate that feeling, that whatever, with that particular place. So they can shoot the lights out in another, or throw the lights out in another stadium or arena, but when they come to that particular one, boom.
There's a critical incident, right?
Wow.
And one of my ahas was I was working with a player who lost a Super Bowl in an arena that was neither his hometown arena nor something in his conference. So it wasn't like he played there every year. So he goes to so again, like let's say, and I'll just make up a team, like, the Albuquerque Isotopes, or the Albuquerque, Isotopes is actually a real team. The Albuquerque, the Albuquerque Archbishops, or something, right?
Sure.
I just want to give some love to my hometown. The Albuquerque, we'll go old school, the Albuquerque Dukes. So the Albuquerque Dukes are in an NFL team. It's very rare for the Albuquerque Dukes to play the Super Bowl in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
So this quarterback, and again, I'm trying to just protect some anonymity.
Sure, of course.
The quarterback had played in a Super Bowl for the Albuquerque Dukes, but the game was in Austin, Texas.
Yep.
Because Austin, Texas also has a team. but they're not in our conference or in our division. So it's not like he plays there a lot. However, every time he does go to that stadium, he was below his average, and he picked up on that.
Wow.
So we had to kind of unpack what happens when you go to that arena. And when he started with, he goes, all I can think about is this mistake, this mistake that caused us to lose the Super Bowl.
Wow.
So that was the critical incident.
Yeah.
Now, what he couldn't do is he couldn't avoid going like, hey, I'm no longer playing in that arena. But it only got worse. It picked up on him. It was the second or third time he played there where he's like, man, I just can't play here. It's like this. And I'm like, you're making a thing.
Yeah.
So having to extinguish that, I think, is an interesting challenge. So when you talk about like helping leaders and players kind of get out of their head, as you were saying, like sometimes it's about learning where their critical incidences of success and where their critical incidences of failure have occurred, and then what meaning they've assigned to those events.
Yeah.
It's not the events, but the meaning they assign to them that matters.
And that's all fascinating. And I can just think of things for me where in my life where I've done that, and then I have a phobia about a certain thing, which makes no sense, right? There's no logical reason, but it's the mental gymnastics. If we pivot to the NCAA, I am fascinated by student athletes. I remember being an undergrad and being in classes with student athletes and just talking to them and thinking, man, you're going to school full time and you've got more than a full time job as an athlete, and you're traveling and you have to plan all the, everything. So I have mad respect for them. So let's talk. And this, we're of course recording this several weeks before March Madness, but this will come out around March Madness. So I would love to get your perspective on the work you've done with, especially if we can, collegiate basketball players around March Madness, where it is a win or go home. There's no like, hey, let's just hang it. It's win or go home. And they've got a full class load. And you talk about the cameras where they're pointed, that March Madness gets an insane amount of coverage. What's going through these young men's head, and what's been your experience working with them in that particular event?
Yeah, no, I've been really lucky. I've worked with a couple of teams that have made it to the Final Four. I've worked with a couple of teams that ranked number 1 in the nation and didn't make it past the Elite Eight. Yeah. God, what's going on through their head? I mean, a lot. I think the bottom line answer is there's a lot going on through their head. One of the things that I find interesting, because sometimes coaches will go, hey, like, how do I prepare them for this? And I think there's kind of two classic approaches. One is treat the game like any other, kind of normalize it, right? So you'd say, hey, the basket's the same size, the court is the same size, just it's any other game. The other is where you recognize that it's different. Like, the TV timeouts are a little bit longer. Halftime gets drawn out a little bit more. There's more people paying attention. And so sometimes I'm trying to evaluate and assess, do they want it to feel more like the same, or do they want it to feel more like it's different? Because I think both avenues and approaches are fair game to evaluate, or are fair solutions to execute.
Yeah.
The other mechanism is, do they see this event as a perceived threat or danger? So I find that if you look at the research, physiological arousal, whether it's excitement or anxiety, is identical. Heart race, eyes dilate, stomach acid production. So it's really what we label it.
Yeah.
That changes the perspective. And the only reason that we label it like, hey, I'm super excited for this moment, or, oh my gosh, I'm terrified of this moment, has to do with whether or not you perceive it as a threat or a danger or an opportunity.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when people, they very rarely will say, hey, I'm freaking out. What they'll mostly say is, I'm really stressed. Like, stressed is the term that people will use as an acceptable definition, right? And it's funny because you're like, well, what kind of stress are we talking about? Because even when you define stress, there's eustress, like if you're married, you mentioned your husband,
Yeah.
like eustress is the feeling of tension and stress you feel like at your marriage. Like it's a wonderful moment. It's an exciting moment, but there is stress involved in
Yeah.
trying to make everything happen. That's eustress. Distress is more of like a negative event, like, hey, I'm in war. I'm in combat.
Yeah.
So stress is still stress. So when they say I'm stressed out, I'm trying to go like, is this eustress? Is this distress? Are we feeling happy energy, or are we feeling? So I tend to align with the player where they're at. And what I try to also do is I try to encourage the player to recognize that emotions are really a force of energy. And if we suspend judgment and just play out a more curious role, then we don't have to label the emotion as good or bad. We just have to label it or identify it as a force of nature. So if I am afraid of losing, or if I hate losing, I can convert that energy into determination that will make me dive for that loose ball.
Yeah.
If I love winning, or I love the game and I have joy in my heart, I can passionately turn that energy into output and behavioral mechanisms. So what I try to do is I try to recognize that every individual is kind of an N of one study. It's not like, oh, here's a universal cure. Like,
Yeah.
I try not to be a hammer that treats everything like a nail.
Sure.
I try to sit there and go, okay, what is part of your optimal performance? What's part of you being at your best? And what kinds of things get in the way of that? And what emotions and energy are you feeling? And how do you want to be feeling and thinking so that you're ready for this moment?
Yeah.
And I think if we put some time and energy into that, then they can induce that when they need to. Turn it on
Yeah.
and turn it off.
Yeah. Man, you just dropped a huge knowledge bomb there earlier, just around excitement and stress. It's how we decide. It's a decision, how we decide to label that. And then that becomes our reality. Yeah. So applicable in so many areas. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by ThriveMore Autopilot. The latest data shows a large amount of small to mid-sized business owners are living paycheck to paycheck, and that is not why you started a business in the first place. We all start businesses to create the freedom in our lives that we want and to give us options. But to do that, you need more leads, and you need to turn those prospects into long-term paying customers. Well, the solution is ThriveMore Autopilot. ThriveMore Autopilot is the turnkey solution to take the stress and the hard work out of new customer acquisition, which is the lifeblood of any small business. ThriveMore Autopilot works on your behalf to generate a waterfall of new leads through various channels, to nurture those leads with proprietary AI solutions that mimic human interaction, to sell memberships and help you increase your monthly recurring revenue, and they even provide you coaching and your team coaching on the most effective sales techniques and give you a community of other like-minded business owners. ThriveMore Autopilot is how you scale your business without stress and the relentless phone calls and texts and reach outs to the prospects to get them to show up for that first appointment or to show up to that call. So learn how ThriveMore Autopilot can help you win big by going to thrivemore.ai. That's thrivemore.ai. ThriveMore Autopilot, the strategic partner for small to mid-sized business owners to help you scale and live the life of your dreams. If you will, just briefly share what you're doing with the NCAA on specifically, I think there's an initiative around mental wellness in student athletes. What's your involvement in that?
Yeah. So I was one of the first embedded psychologists in an athletic department. This was 25 years ago. There just wasn't very many of us. And this was at the University of Arizona, which I still fondly reflect on as one of the best times of my professional life because the people there were amazing. The head athletic trainer, Randy Cohen, brilliant. The staff, Justin Kokoski, who worked with the basketball program, brilliant athletic trainer. Emily Johnson, brilliant athletic trainer, who's now the current director of their program. Our athletic director, who oversaw everything, was Jim Livengood, brilliant. Greg Byrne, who's now at Alabama, brilliant. Team docs, Don Porter, Bruce Helming, Dave Millward, brilliant. And the reason why I mention all of their names in Arizona is we collectively built a really good program for the student athletes and the coaches. And the NCAA recognized that. And they made us part of their mental health task force. They made me part of their mental health task force. And from that, Dr. Brian Hainline, who was at the time then the chief medical officer, first ever for the NCAA and the Sports Science Institute, he recognized that mental health and the demands of the student athlete, as you pointed out earlier, would be an issue to address. So he kindly asked me to contribute on a few different projects, including, the best practice and guidelines. We also wrote a book that was, that the NCAA distributed. And then the NATA, the athletic trainers, the National Organization for Athletic Trainers, NATA, they did a comprehensive paper that they asked me to be a part of that was all about best practice. And what was cool about that paper was it had a lawyer, it had a team doc, it had a head athletic trainer, it had myself as a psychologist. So it really took this holistic approach. So that was a lot of the work that I was doing for about 15 years of my career.
Yeah, it's powerful and important work. Yeah. All right, just a pivot here. So my listeners know I'm an avid reader. I've just fallen in love with reading and learning in probably the last 2 decades. And I just devour stuff. And so I always ask my guests, is there a book, and I'm sure there's dozens and dozens, but is there a book around the subject we're talking about today that you would recommend or that you read that really had an impact on you? And, you'd recommend to the listeners if they want to, again, level up different areas of their life.
Instead of explaining one book, can I just give you a short list?
Sure. Fire away.
I love Atul Gawande's Checklist Manifesto.
Yeah.
I think that thing's brilliant. I love the Dalai Lama and the Art of Happiness. I think that book is awesome. I love Edge by Littleton, Lyttleton. I thought that book was so spot on. I thought The Captain's Class was really well done. I could go on and on, but that's my short list right there for you. I don't know if I could pick one.
I'm gonna have to check out Edge. I've not read that, and I could see you kind of light up when you talked about it. So yeah.
So Edge is interesting because it hasn't made it overseas as well as I thought it would have. So he is a writer, and in Britain, in Great Britain, and what he did is each chapter is him going to different teams asking what's your edge. And it's a book that's meant for business. But I found we love to cross-pollinate. Like, for example, the Golden State Warriors are never going to play against the Minnesota Vikings. So if there's an opportunity to go to the Minnesota Vikings practice and see what they're doing and then bring it back to the Golden State Warriors, that's a win.
Yeah.
So I thought what was really cool about his book was each chapter was explaining what a particular team like Atletico Madrid saw as their competitive advantage. And so I just was like, wow, that's a neat nugget. So again, it's meant for business, but I found it to be really helpful for some of the things that I've tried to bring to the professional organizations I work for.
Yeah, cool. Great recommendation. All right, last 2 questions before I want you to share where people can connect or follow you, at least, be part of your journey. But here's the question that when I said father leader, or father husband leader, I went through this year-long leadership academy, and there's an application process. And to get in, they interview you, and one of the questions that they asked, I'm going to ask you, if we fast forward to the end of your rich, beautiful life, and all these young men and women and professional athletes you've helped, but that time has passed like it does for all of us, and we're at the end, and we're at your funeral, and you're looking down from above or wherever, and a loved one is reading your eulogy, but Doc, they're only allowed to use 3 words to describe you. And it doesn't have to make a sentence. It could, but what 3 words do you hope they choose to describe the life that you lived and who you were?
Laughter, Experience, curious.
I love it. And I asked that question because to me, if you figure out those three words, life gets a little bit easier because you know that the decisions you make need to support those three things. And if the decision doesn't support those three things, probably not the right decision. It's just such a powerful question to bring clarity. And then the last one that's kind of fun is, I can't wait to hear your answer, is if I were to give you a magic wand and you wave that magic wand tonight, and we wake up in the morning and the world's different in one material way, one way, right? If I gave you that wand, you waved it, and we woke up in the morning, how is the world different according to you?
So there's a psychologist named De Chaucer, and this is, I believe, the origin of this question. Yeah, so it's a great therapeutic question. So De Chaucer's, he calls it the magic wand, or the magic question.
Yeah.
So De Chaucer says, imagine that an angel or a potion, like, again, imagine some device taps you on the shoulder and you're cured. What would be different about you? And that generally can help people isolate what they want their treatment agenda to be. So, all right. But your version is slightly different because you're saying something is different about the world.
The way the people are, the way the world operates, you can weigh this, and we wake up tomorrow and just, it's different in one material way that you would like it to be.
I think I would love the world to be, while still pursuing extreme achievements, going back to that second of my three words, like experience is probably the wrong word, because what I'm talking about is like fulfilled, like having done some really cool things. So I would love for us to continue to still, I think I'm focusing more on human beings than I am on the world. Objectively, like, hey, let's get rid of oceans or something, like
sure.
those are important. I think what I would try to accomplish with this magic wand would be, while we still continue to pursue extreme and dynamic stuff like going to Mars, that we eliminate, you said eliminate, right? Eliminate
just
something,
change whatever.
Something.
Yeah.
This antagonistic extremism that seems to be more prevalent in modern society, this polarized mechanism of us versus them.
Yeah.
It'd be neat if we could figure out ways to connect with one another. Don't always have to agree, but just to connect and accept and relate.
Yeah.
That would be neat if we could change that a little bit.
There's a common theme of answers to that question among my guests, that it's around compassion and understanding, like really truly understanding and having genuine curiosity for other humans, versus I'm right and you're wrong, which is where we've ended up somehow. Most important question.
Or we could get rid of mosquitoes.
Yeah,
I really hate mosquitoes.
Exactly. No one said that. That's the first time someone said that.
Those are the two option paths that we can go.
I love it. So where can people follow you, connect with you, just be part of your journey, like social and anything? How can they do that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's interesting, because I've often thought of like social media as a place to promote oneself, and I'm not really much of a self-promoter. Like, I don't even have a website.
Yeah.
But when you phrase it in like, hey, how can people connect with you? Like, I've never really thought of it as a mechanism of connection. Probably the easiest would just be my email, which is just, my first name is Scott. So it's that first letter S, and then my last name, Goldman, Goldman at AIQ.team.
Okay.
So if someone wants to email me, they can just email me at sgoldman at AIQ.team. If they want to check out the AIQ, the website, AIQ.team, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on X or whatever it's called today. I'm on Facebook, but like, to be honest with you, I don't really post a lot of things. Sure. But if you DM me, I think that's what the kids say these days. Like, if you DM me, I mean, one thing I always try to do is, no matter who contacts me or how they contact me, I always make a point to respond.
That's
I
great.
just feel like that's a respectful thing to do.
Yeah. Well, we'll put those in the show notes too. So if somebody's driving, listening to Spotify or Apple, they don't get in a car wreck, they can get home and then click the link there. Dr. Goldman, I just want to say thank you. Like, and I mean this, you are a deep thinker.
Oh, cool.
And it's been fun and enlightening to ask you a question and watch you just take a breath and really process what you want to say, which is not normal these days. It's like you said, sound bites, right? Quick sound bites. And I dig that energy, that really thoughtful energy. So thank you for coming on the ThriveMore podcast.
Oh, thank you. This was a really fun experience. You're a good interviewer. That's for dang sure. So thank you for asking some really cool questions. You gave me an opportunity to think about some people and some things that I've engaged with that I haven't thought about for quite some time. So that's really neat too.
I love it, man. That means a lot. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the ThriveMore podcast. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any of the resources that we mentioned during the podcast. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and the greatest. You can connect with me on any of the socials at Real Roger Martin. And be sure to check out our website, ThriveMoreBrands.com. There you'll find information on the brands we support and information on franchising. Thanks again for tuning in.